Back in 2001, at the absolute peak of its popularity, the TV show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire wasn't just a show, it was a national event. Every night, millions of Brits gathered around their TVs, totally captivated by the drama unfolding in that iconic studio. The format was simple. One person, 15 questions, and £1 million hanging in the balance. It was a fantasy factory, a place where ordinary people could see their lives transformed in a single hour. The show had already crowned 2 millionaires, and the country was hungry for another. On September 10, 2001, it looked like they'd found their next hero. A British Army major named Charles Ingram was in the hot seat, staring down the final question for the £1 million prize. The tension was electric. The host, Chris Tarrant, looked on, a mix of awe and disbelief on his face. And then the words that would go down in television history. "You've just won £1 million." Confetti rained down, champagne corks popped. A nation cheered as the seemingly ordinary major embraced his wife Diana in a moment of pure joy. He had done the impossible. But what the cheering audience and the millions watching at home didn't know was that this wasn't a victory. They were witnessing a crime. This was no ordinary win, and the celebration was a carefully constructed lie. And the clue that would unravel it all, a clue so small it was almost missed entirely, was a simple cough. He thought he had pulled off the perfect crime, an audacious plan executed on the world's biggest stage. But this wasn't a battlefield, and his opponent wasn't a rival army. It was a game show. For a moment, it seemed he had done it. The money was his, but the victory was a ghost that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because behind the scenes, a thread was already being pulled. A whisper of suspicion was turning into a full-blown investigation. When a £15,000 fine was handed down by a court, it did more than just take away money he never really had. It exposed the shocking contradiction between the man everyone thought he was and the man he appeared to be. This is the story of how a few seemingly innocent coughs led to one of the biggest scandals in TV history, and how the coughing major became a household name for all the wrong reasons. To understand how a respected officer in the British Army ended up at the center of a national scandal, you have to get your head around the cultural force that was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It wasn't more than a quiz, it was a phenomenon. "Is that your final answer?" became a national catchphrase. The dramatic pauses, the intense lighting, the heartbeat soundtrack, it was all designed to create unbearable suspense. And the prize money? For the time, it was astronomical. £1 million could buy you a new life. This dream was especially powerful for Charles and Diana Ingram. On the surface, they were the picture of middle-class respectability. Charles William Ingram was born in 1963 and followed a distinguished path, attending private school before getting a degree in civil engineering. In 1986, he kicked off an impressive military career, training at the prestigious Royal Military Academy Sandhurst and joining the Royal Engineers. He rose steadily through the ranks, being promoted to captain in 1990 and then to major in the mid-1990s. This wasn't just a desk job. In 1999, he served a 6-month peacekeeping tour in Bosnia. To his colleagues, he was the model of a modern major. Diana, a teacher whom he'd married in 1989, lived with him and their 3 children in a modest home in Wiltshire. But beneath this idyllic surface, financial pressures were growing, and the Ingrams, especially Diana and her brother Adrian, had developed an obsession with the one thing that seemed to offer a magical solution. Who wants to be a millionaire? They weren't just casual viewers. They were part of a dedicated, almost secret subculture of quiz fanatics, a network of people who had figured out how to game the show's selection process. They realized the phone-in quiz rotated through a limited set of questions. By working together, they could massively increase their chances of getting on the show. For them, it wasn't a game of chance. It was a puzzle to be solved. The family had already had some success. Both Diana and her brother Adrian had made it to the hot seat, each winning a respectable £32,000. But £32,000 wasn't £1,000,000. It was nice, but it wasn't life-changing. Spurred on by his wife, Charles decided to throw his hat in the ring. He practiced relentlessly, even building a homemade fastest finger first buzzer to sharpen his reaction time. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a family obsession. But when Charles Ingram finally got his chance on September 9, 2001, it seemed the dream was over. His first day in the hot seat was a disaster. He was nervous and uncertain, stumbling through the easy questions. He burned through 2 of his 3 lifelines just to scrape his way to £4,000. When the show ended for the night, the production team was unimpressed. They saw him as a contestant who was highly unlikely to get much further. No one could have predicted what would happen next, because when Charles Ingram returned the following evening, he wouldn't be that same bumbling contestant. A brazen plan had been set in motion, and it relied on a third accomplice sitting quietly among the fastest finger first hopefuls. His name was Tequin Widdock, a 53-year-old college lecturer who, the Ingrams insisted, they'd never met. The Charles Ingram who sat down in the hot seat on September 10th was a changed man. The hesitant contestant from the night before was gone. In his place was a man who, while still pretending to be unsure, played the game with a bizarre and risky new strategy. With only his 50-50 lifeline left, he navigated the tough questions with what looked like a mix of wild guesses and incredible luck. The method was simple. For each question, Ingram would read all 4 options aloud, over and over. He'd voice his doubts, dismiss an answer he seemed sure was wrong, and then somehow circle back to it. And at key moments, right as he spoke the correct answer, a distinct cough would pop up from the audience. The first really suspicious moment came at the £16,000 question. Who had a hit with the song Space Oddity? Ingram claimed he'd never heard of the song or David Bowie. He leaned towards naming another artist, Craig David. "I think Craig David is the answer," he declared. But then a clear cough was heard right after he mentioned the correct option, David Bowie. Suddenly, Ingram's certainty vanished. In a pattern that would define the night, he backtracked. "I'm gonna go for Bowie," he finally said, confusing host Chris Tarrant, who commented on his sudden change of heart. As Ingram climbed higher, the pattern got more obvious and his behavior more erratic. For the £32,000 question about the home of the Wombles, he again claimed total ignorance. He dismissed Wimbledon Common, only to pick it after another well-timed cough. Tarrant was baffled. "You've never heard of the Wombles of Wimbledon Common?" he asked, incredulous. To a British audience, this was like not knowing who Mickey Mouse was. The tension wasn't just for the viewers. Behind the cameras, the crew was getting deeply suspicious. The floor manager, Phil Davis, was one of the first to notice. The studio is smaller than it looks on TV, and from his position, he could see both Ingram and the other hopefuls. He heard the coughs and saw Tequin Widdock in the third chair making them. According to Davis, Widdock would turn towards the hot seat, give a single sharp cough, and then turn away. It wasn't a natural cough, it was a signal. The producers in the control room also noticed the strange link between the coughs and Ingram's sudden changes of mind. The sound engineers started isolating the microphones to pinpoint the source. The atmosphere, which should have been exciting, was curdling into one of disbelief. Meanwhile, Ingram was rocketing towards the $1 million. At $250,000, the question was about Jacqueline Kennedy's second husband. Ingram spent ages deliberating, at one point saying he was sure it wasn't Aristotle Onassis. But then, another cough, he reversed course and locked in Onassis. Tarrant was no longer just a host. He was a spectator to one of the most bizarre performances he'd ever seen. "You've been the most amazing contestant we have ever had," Tarrant remarked, a statement loaded with unintended irony. Then came the £1 million question. A number 1 followed by 100 zeros is known by what name? The options were A. Google, B. Megatron, C. Gigabyte, or D. Nanomole. Ingram admitted he had no idea. he immediately dismissed Google, saying, "I'm not sure I've ever heard of a Google." He spent several minutes talking himself into nanomole, but then another contestant, Larry Whitehurst, who knew the answer was Google, watched Tequin Whittock. Right on cue, Whittock coughed loudly. At the same time, Diana Ingram in the audience also let out a cough. The effect was immediate. Charles abruptly abandoned nanomole and reconsidered Google. "I'm going to play Google," he announced. Tarrant was stunned. Final answer. A long pause. Then Tarrant, shaking his head, uttered the fateful words, "You've just won £1,000,000. The studio erupted. Confetti flew, champagne was opened, but Tarrant couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He later remembered hearing what sounded like an argument between Charles and Diana in their dressing room right after the show. The celebration felt wrong. The victory felt hollow, and the producer—
The moment the cameras stopped rolling, the celebration crumbled. While the Ingrams were being toasted with champagne, a storm was brewing in the production offices. The team was convinced they'd been cheated. Paul Smith, the head of the production company Celador, made the call: suspend the broadcast and, crucially, withhold the £1,000,000 check. First, they reviewed the tapes. Listening with headphones, the coughs were glaringly obvious. There were 19 significant coughs, all strategically timed. The evidence was so compelling that Celador called the police. The matter was now a criminal investigation. Just over a week after his win, Charles Ingram got a call from Paul Smith, who calmly informed him that the police had been notified and payment was being stopped. Ingram's response wasn't outrage. He simply said, "Right, well, yeah, I completely refute that, obviously," and expressed that he was absolutely gobsmacked. The story inevitably leaked to the press, and it exploded. The tabloids had a field day, christening Ingram the coughing major. The story had everything: a popular show, big money, and a bizarre cheating method. But the most shocking part for many was his identity. This wasn't just some guy. He was a serving major in the British Army. The Army represents honor and integrity, and the image of an officer stooping to public deception was deeply jarring. It wasn't a hidden identity that was suddenly unleashed, but rather a shocking contradiction. How could Major Charles Ingram, the dedicated soldier who had served in Bosnia, be the same person as the bumbling, cheating game show contestant? It was this duality that fascinated and appalled the nation. The Army was horrified. Ingram had brought his uniform, his rank, and the entire service into disrepute. The media frenzy was relentless. The Ingrams were followed everywhere, their children were bullied, and their pet cat was reportedly shot with an air rifle. They went from an anonymous family to national pariahs overnight. The investigation eventually led to Charles and Diana Ingram, along with Tequin Whittock, being formally charged with procuring the execution of a valuable security by deception. The stage was set for a trial that would grip the nation. Before we get to the verdict and the incredible fallout, if you're finding this story as fascinating as we do, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We unravel stories like this every week, and you won't want to miss what's next. In March 2003, the trial of Charles Ingram, Diana Ingram, and Tequin Whittock began at Southwark Crown Court. It was a media circus. The prosecution's case was built around the audio recordings. They played the tapes for the jury, with the 19 significant coughs amplified. The prosecution argued this was a clear, deliberate code. Fellow contestant Larry Whitehurst testified that he noticed the pattern of coughing and had watched Whittock do it. The defense fought back, arguing the case was purely circumstantial. They portrayed the Ingrams as naive quiz fans unfairly targeted by a powerful company. They challenged the audio evidence, claiming it was manipulated and not what was heard in the studio. Whittock's defense was that he suffered from a lifelong chronic cough. However, the prosecution countered this by showing footage from later in the show when Whittock himself reached the hot seat. During his own gameplay, his chronic cough had miraculously vanished. Charles Ingram took the stand, insisting he heard no significant coughing and that his erratic gameplay was just a high-risk strategy. After more than 3 days, the jury returned its verdict. On April 7, 2003, all three were found guilty. The judge called their scheme a shabby, if determined, attempt to steal £1 million. Charles and Diana Ingram each received an 18-month prison sentence suspended for 2 years. Tequin Whittock received a 12-month sentence, also suspended. Then came the financial blow. Each of them was fined £15,000. On top of that, the Ingrams were ordered to pay thousands more in prosecution and defense costs, eventually bringing their total bill to over £100,000. The £1 million was a fantasy, but the debts were crushingly real. They were later forced into bankruptcy. For Charles Ingram, the punishment didn't stop there. On August 19, 2003, the Army Board ordered him to resign his commission. After 17 years of service, his military career was over. The saga took another sordid turn later that year when the Ingrams faced a completely separate insurance fraud case. Ingram was found guilty of deception for failing to disclose his claims history when taking on a new policy. Though he was given a conditional discharge, the prosecutor's words stuck, describing him as ineluctably dishonest. This second case seemed to cement in the public's mind that the coughing major was a man for whom deception had become a habit. Conclusion: a legacy of doubt. In the 2 decades since, the story of the coughing major has become a permanent fixture in British pop culture. The Ingrams, stripped of their reputation and financially ruined, tried to navigate life in the spotlight with appearances on reality shows like Wife Swap and Hell's Kitchen. In recent years, they've lived a quieter life, with Diana selling handmade jewelry at local markets. Yet, for all the certainty of the verdict, a shadow of doubt has grown. The Ingrams have always maintained their innocence. Their cause was taken up by supporters, and the 2020 ITV drama Quiz presented a more sympathetic view of the events. The series highlighted potential inconsistencies, like why would you choose a man with a diagnosed uncontrollable cough to be your accomplice in a scheme that required precise timing. It also emphasized how the audio evidence was enhanced by the production company, which had a vested interest in securing a guilty verdict. And so, the story remains in a strange limbo. On one hand, you have a jury's verdict and the seemingly damning evidence of the coughs. On the other hand, you have nagging questions about a family pushed to the brink and the overwhelming power of a trial by media. The story of the coughing major is more than just a tale of cheating. It's a story about obsession, desperation, and how quickly a reputation can be shattered. And it leaves us with one final lingering question. Was it a masterful crime, a clumsy plan destined to fail, or, as the Ingrams have claimed for over 20 years, one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in British television history? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into fascinating stories, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.